"Are you ready for the next performance?" Hassan asked the old man before the entrance to the grand hall. "Perhaps give it a few more moments," Dern responded. "There are a few who may need a bit to recover from your last surprise." "I imagine my father has given Shogun an earful by now." "You set a few council members up for some uncomfortable talks with their wives as well, if you remember," Dern added with a chuckle. Dern and Hassan had watched as everyone filed into the grand hall until only they remained in the final rays of the setting sun. It was there they stood now, contemplating their next move, and waiting for the right moment to proceed. The founding of the Honor Guard was a swift and covert act completed outside of the Kahra's purview. But now, they were at a point where in order to move forward they must perform in a much more challenging arena. Hassan's father was certain to be incensed by his recent actions, and would likely be prepared for anything. But tonight was intended for something different. Something that would be difficult for the Kahra to predict. And even more difficult to stop once begun. "How many people know what you're about to reveal?" Hassan asked. "Your father for certain," Dern began, as he appeared to calculate in his mind. "I imagine at least half of the council knows some of the basics, and perhaps a handful of the rest. It isn't exactly forbidden to tell anyone. In fact, there was a time long ago when everyone knew the stories. But tradition only requires a new Ka be told the legacy. And sadly, it's been that way for many years." His words trailed off with dismay as the loss of that shared knowledge were almost painful to him. "Welcome. Do you think it'll do any good?" "For you? Certainly," Dern replied emphatically. "This is something you need to know." He paused and thought a moment, his features growing strained. "Your father will be perturbed at the corruption of tradition, I expect. He has a strained relationship with the secrets of our people, but I can only postulate. For most it will be what it always is, merely a story. But a few perhaps will hear these words as the truth they are, and every one of them who believes will be one more ally for you when it comes to facing our greatest threat." Their discussion was abruptly interrupted by the bellowing laugh of Gorshaw from within. "Hold on, I'm going to close the door to the raptor." Now he's angry. Hold on one moment. I hate to break this up, but my bird is screeching. Okay. "Your father for certain," to begin. "I imagine at least half of the council..." This is rereading. "Do you think it'll do any good?" "For you, certainly," Dern replied emphatically. "This is something you need to know." He paused and thought a moment before his features growing strained. "Your father will be perturbed at the corruption of tradition, I expect. He has a strained relationship with the secrets of our people, but with luck, he'll be unable to intervene. As for the others, I can only postulate. For most, it will be what it always is, merely a story. But a few perhaps will hear these words as the truth they are, and every one of them who believes will be one more ally for you when it comes to facing our greatest threat." The discussion was abruptly interrupted by the bellowing laugh of Gorshaw from within. "It appears they've cracked open the drink at last," Dern chuckled. "That's our cue," Hassan replied, anxiety clear in his voice. He took a deep breath to steady himself and looked to Dern. "Shall we?" Then he turned to lead the way into the grand hall. "Remember," Dern's whispered voice assured from behind, "you're Ka, Hassan." Hassan parted the thick-hide doors and entered a familiar world of happier days. It had been a while since he joined in the nighttime camaraderie of his people. The combination of sights, sounds, and smells was so intoxicating that for a moment the apprehension he felt simply drifted away. The smoke-filled air was laced with enticing smells of food and heady incense that sent waves of calm rolling through him. His stomach, awakened by the delicious aromas, gave an angry growl as it was racked with hunger pains. The flickering lights of fires and lamps sent a million shadows dancing across the canvas walls and ceiling in a myriad of hypnotic patterns. There was nothing more welcoming than the raucous noise of his people, reveling in each other's company and the good food and drink that went with it. The chatter dimmed, and most eyes turned his direction at his entrance. The looks were different than before. There was measured respect in those stares behind the appraising of his worth. With his recently orchestrated plot, he must have reversed much of the damage to his image. Dern warned about on the morning that felt so long ago now. There was a hunger out there as well, in the eyes of mothers and daughters who saw the newly risen Ka as even more of a catch than before. But for the first time it didn't irritate him or make him want to run and hide. He had learned to accept it as part of his station. It didn't mean he liked it, or that he intended to make that decision anytime soon. But he could find ways to ease the burden of it. With a smile and a wink, he set one particular group of girls into a tizzy of giggles and babbling. To the average observer it might appear an innocent flirtation. But Neset was among the affected youths, and Hassan was certain her mother Nahima would take notice. Every move he made this night was calibrated to increase his advantage in the game he set to be played. Hassan found himself unexpectedly flanked by Jaka and Brehon. Their swift arrival suggested they were waiting nearby for his entrance. Neither looked in his direction. They merely stood at attention on each side. "What are you doing?" Hassan whispered furtively. "On duty," Jaka replied. Brehon chimed in. "We're your honor guard, remember? Our job is to protect the Ka." "Protect it from who?" Hassan stammered, losing his calm demeanor. "On nights as pivotal as this, you need to be guarded against more than just blades," Dern's voice counseled from behind. "Appearances and assumptions can be just as dangerous to those in power." "Who put you up to this?" Hassan demanded in a harsh half-whisper. "We did," Jaka answered. "As we said," Brehon added seriously, "it's our duty. Cho'Gha promoted us to squad leaders, at least until you decide on ranks. And since no one else was prepared to take first watch, we took it upon ourselves." "I should devote you both to digging latrines," Hassan snapped back more fiercely than planned. "Look," he moderated his tone, "this isn't what I intended. The honor guard is a way to outwit my father. I didn't intend for you to stand guard over me." "You're our Ka," Jaka muttered, as if that explained it all. "You've started something, Hassan," Brehon replied with restrained anger. "Those who joined did so because they believe in it. If you diminish that by making this some ploy against your father, you'll lose their loyalty. Either we're your honor guard or we're not. Tell us now so we can stop playing games." "It cannot simply be a guise," Dern added. "Your father is smart enough to see through the deception if you don't treat it seriously. If he has the slightest hint you're playing a game, he will use that to overrule you with the council." Hassan took a long, calming breath as he considered his friend's words. "You're right. This can't be a ploy. Otherwise, I dishonor you all and risk everything. I accept your protection." As an afterthought, he added scoldingly, "But we'll discuss this squad leader business later." "Your will, my Ka," his two guards answered in unison, smug smiles beaming on their faces. The rumbling banter of the Grand Hall returned slowly. After Hassan's initial entrance, well over 100 men, women, and children were gathered within the large hide structure, and even with that many occupants, the empty spaces where the warriors should be were evident. Their absence was felt throughout the tribe, and the affected families were embraced by other groups in an attempt to blunt those vacancies. A massive fire blazed in the center. Its smoke vented through an opening in the roof. Gorsha was performing his usual drunken act before the flames. Those equally consumed with drink were gathered close to listen to the inebriated Herbmaster entertain them with slurred wit and bawdy tales. Others watched and laughed along from afar, while the majority were occupied with their own conversations. It was to the untrained eye a typical night among the Khan'Shagal, unless your focus was on the men gathered upon the raised platform at the head of the enclosure. Kahra Hassan watched his son's entrance attentively from his seat among the council members. There was a heated debate embroiling those around him, yet his gaze never shifted from Hassan. It wasn't a look of scorn, or even challenge, but an assessment of an unexpected opponent. 10 marks since they're talking about you, Brehon wagered with a grin. Hardly a fair guess, Hassan responded. But we're going to stay the center of attention if we continue standing here. I just wish we could find an out of the way place to eat. You know where your rightful place is, Dern remarked, and sooner or later you're going to have to face him. Our plans will go much more smoothly if it is sooner. Very well. Hassan took one more moment to steady his nerves, then proceeded. It felt like walking through a gladiator arena. His challenger watched him come, without a hint of change in his bearing. As he approached the dais, the fervent byplay among the council went silent. The looks that turned to Hassan were mixed in what they revealed, but that was to be expected. There were the inevitable hangers-on that every man in power attracted. Their loyalty was never in doubt, for their allegiance was to power, and what it could provide for them. The more traditionalist members were certain to be fervent supporters of the Ka-Ra, and their scornful stares made that fact clear. There were a few independent-minded men who looked to Hassan with curiosity, not yet allowing the views of Hassan to change their judgment. Then there were the members whose support Hassan carefully nudged into his favor earlier. Out of the 12 sitting members, the alignments were pretty evenly split, and they were seated in clear contention between sides. "Your Ka wishes to sit in his rightful place," Brahman asserted to the 2 members seated to the right of the Ka-Ra, a spot normally reserved for the chief's heir. "My apologies, Hassan." Nervash, one of the more zealous sycophants to the Ka-Ra, responded in a less than sincere tone. "It's been so long since you've graced us with your presence." "Hassan," Jaka corrected in his deep, rumbling tone. "What? Oh, yes." Nervash was off balance by the chastisement. "I apologize, my Ka. As I was stating, it's been a great deal of time since you've claimed your rightful position. My disrespect was merely a slip from the novelty of the situation." He gathered himself up with clear agitation and ushered his companion to a new location. "You'll have plenty of time to practice, Nervash, as my presence will be more permanent from now on. I'd hate for any further absence on my part to lead to more embarrassment on yours." "Ha!" Hassan chuckled. It was the first change in countenance since Hassan entered. "I almost doubt this is my son. What a difference a few days make!" Those on the chieftain's side laughed at Hassan's expense. The other councillors appeared unsure how to respond. They were still gauging the changes in the Ka and what it all meant. Hassan, unable to let the remark go, replied without a hint of animosity. "It wasn't the days but the circumstances and necessity that drove this change. Everything that happened recently has forced me to grow and adapt to meet the needs of my people." There was a murmur of assent among the other side of the council. Hassan deliberately took his seat in a show of victory. He motioned for Dern to sit at his side. Jaka and Brahan took up positions behind him to stand guard. "Your place at my side is assured, Hassan." The Ka-Ra's glare turned to the old man. "But he doesn't belong among the council. He's put enough nonsense in your head." Hassan was stunned by such a blunt dismissal of Dern. The old man had always been valued for his knowledge and teaching prowess, despite his roguish nature. And even though they had an oddly strained relationship, the Ka-Ra sought his counsel on numerous matters. Yet Hassan clearly saw Dern as the source of Hassan's rebellion, and believed removing the influence would re-establish the common order. But Hassan needed Dern for the night's endeavor. "He has every right in his official capacity as my advisor," Hassan countered on the fly. "Clever," Dern whispered so only Hassan could hear. "Advisor?" Hassan grunted dismissively. "What need do you have for an advisor? Perhaps to tell you to arm children?" "I will attend the Dahara for the first time as rightful Ka. If I'm not mistaken, that grants me near equal authority before the clans. So I've chosen an advisor to prepare me. Is there a law against that? Hikaya?" Hassan directed his question to one of the traditionalists. Hikaya was a strict adherent to the laws of the Conchogal, and was well versed in every minutiae of restrictions going back centuries. Hassan wasn't certain of his argument. He cobbled it together from the bits and pieces he'd learned already, and just hoped it was close enough to the truth. Hikaya appeared perplexed by the question, and the looks turned in his direction. He was inclined to support the Ka-Ra, but as he mulled the issue over, the look on his face suggested difficulty. Well, it's not traditionally done." He wrung his hands nervously. "It would seem Hassan is correct in his understanding of the law." "Thank you, Hikaya." Hassan turned his attention back to his father. "As for your claim of arming children, I argue it is also my right as Ka to enter the Dahara, accompanied by an honor guard, considering the lack of warriors due to recent events. I was forced to accept younger volunteers, but it seems only fitting that I ride in the company of my peers, does it not?" His father flinched at the reference to the missing soldiers, but his anger didn't prevail. Is that also within the constraints of the law, Hikaya?" The counselor could only nod. Resignation written across his face. "Over 30 men seems a tad excessive," Nervash chimed in. Not everyone will complete training. Besides, imagine the faces of the Kahraleh when I ride in accompanied by 30 spears. There was a chorus of agreement among the counselors, even among a few Kahra's supporters. Enough! Hazan broke in. We're at dinner, not council. Such bickering unsettles my stomach. We'll discuss these matters later. Hassan smiled as he realized he was the victor in this match. His heart still beat fiercely in his chest from the adrenaline, and it felt like a flock of birds had taken flight in his guts, but a feeling of pride filled him to brimming. I couldn't have done it without your tutelage, Hassan offered to Dern, low enough not to be overheard. Nonsense. I merely gave you the tools. You're the one who made something worthy with them. But the night isn't over and a battle isn't done. Take this reprieve to feast and revel in your accomplishments. Hassan nodded, then turned to his honor guards. Your Ka wishes to eat. He gave a sly smirk. While they did it for his own good, they would pay for making him accept their service. Maybe get yourself something while you're at it. Brayhen's face revealed how badly he wished to give some witty retort, but the present company held his words at bay. We saw to our needs before your arrival, he replied, though there was a strain that spoke of the desire to cut loose. As for yours, it appears that's already been seen to. He motioned to where two figures approached, bearing plates laden with food. Nahima and her daughter Neset approached with a ridiculous display of deference. But though their heads were bowed in respect, their hips swayed with sultry abandon. Hassan wasn't the only one to notice their suggestive bearing. There were mumbles of appreciation among the council members and a few ogling eyes. Nahima's husband, Darshan, wasn't put off by his wife's display in the least, and in fact bragged to the others. Serve your Ka, dear, Nahima instructed her daughter. Neset giggled coquettishly, a sharp contrast to the hunger in her eyes. She knelt with an alluring grace and leaned forward to place the platters, while at the same time revealing the loosely covered ampleness of her bosom. Would my Ka desire anything more? She asked with a supple pout of her lips and a flicker of charcoal lashes. I wish but to serve in any manner you wish. Hassan cleared a sudden tightness in his throat. He considered his words, not wishing to lead Neset on too much, but at the same time he needed to assure Darshan of his chances to marry his daughter to the Ka. He was walking a fine line to avoid losing an ally, while not getting entangled in expectations he had no intention of keeping. Thank you, Neset. Hassan forgot what he meant to say next. Her presence was having an unexpected effect. While he struggled to compose his thoughts, her features entranced him. Her eyes hinted at sensuality, and her fragrance flooded his senses, filling him with burning lust. Bacon! You wonderful child! Dern exclaimed, reaching over to grasp the salty treat from the platter. The word startled Hassan out of his haze. He shook his head to clear the fog, then took a sip of wine to hide his disorientation. Will you happen to have any more of this? Dern wagged a grease-laden strip in the air. The fat spattered across the front of Neset's dress. Oh, forgive me, darling. I'm so sorry. Excuse the doddering old klutz. He apologized emphatically as the girl leaped to her feet in shock. I apologize for my advisor, Hassan told her, his ability to speak returning. I'm willing to pay for a new one. Neset regained her composure, then looked intently into Hassan's eyes. Her face stiffened in frustration at whatever she saw or didn't see, and then she turned to her mother in dismay. Go. Clean yourself up, child. You don't want it to stain, Nahima insisted. She ushered her daughter away, then turned back to Hassan. There's no need for restitution, my Ka. A woman must always risk spills and stains, especially one who wishes to serve a man properly. Despite the somewhat thwarted tone in her voice, she was determined to make her point. She cast a scathing glare at Dern, and mumbled something that sounded strikingly like bungling old fool, then followed her daughter in retreat. A roar of laughter erupted from the council as the woman left. They don't let you rub them down with grease until you marry them, a raucous cheer set the already howling merriment into near hysterics. Aye, but that one's worth it, greased or not, right, Hassan? Tokrosh, one of the more boisterous of the council members, blurted out. You certainly seemed enamored with her, Neset's father added cajolingly. Hassan felt off about the whole matter. He couldn't deny Neset was attractive and certainly had her charms. But until this evening he never felt the slightest interest. She was shallow and vain. Not to mention, it was abundantly clear she was only after his title. So why was he swooning over her just now? He felt so befuddled it took a moment to answer Darshan. She's lovely. Thankfully it appeared to satisfy the hopeful father. Hassan felt off about the whole matter. No, sorry. Wishing to ignore the crude banter breaking out among the council, Azan focused on the food. He just took his first bite when Dern whispered, "Is your head clear yet?" "What do you mean?" "The clever girl drugged you," Dern continued to whisper to avoid attention. "I suspect it was her mother. I doubt Nisette has any clue where to find smitten root." "Drugged me? How?" "What's smitten root?" "It is a drug made from the root of a certain flower. It's used for a lot of beneficial purposes by healers, but if you refine it enough, the extract scent can trigger a person into uncontrollable lust. Nisette was doused in it, probably in hopes you would be so taken with her that you would propose marriage on the spot." "How could you tell?" Hassan asked. "I could smell it." "Then there was the fact you were lusting over her like a stallion to a mare in heat," Dern replied with a teasing grin. "So why weren't you lusting after her?" Hassan asked, attempting to overcome his chagrin. "It only works on a person once. The mind creates a defense to it. After that, it becomes nothing more than a mildly pleasant scent." "Someone used it on you?" The disbelief in Hassan's voice was evident. Why, I mean, who?" He tried to recover, but it was too late. "I have been around a long time, and I've not always been an old man," Dern argued. "As for who, it was so many years a name would be meaningless to you." His eyes grew unfocused as he privately reminisced, a look of absolute contentment. Brahan couldn't resist the chance to comment. "Did someone interrupt you too, or did the poor girl have to go through with it?" Jaka guffawed loudly, drawing a bit of unwanted attention. "Never mind that," Dern scolded testily, though a tinge of embarrassment colored his cheeks. "We have a fine meal to eat and more pressing matters." As the scrutiny faded, Brahan leaned down and whispered for Dern and Hassan, "I just want you to remember something. If a girl like Nisette ever drugs me, don't go interfering." With an impish smile and wink, he retreated back to the attention in the background. "I don't understand what their little plot accomplished," Hassan remarked. "Wouldn't it be better to get me alone and try it? Then they could claim I defiled their daughter and force me to marry." "I doubt a marriage of duress would appease Nahima. That would shatter her image of being favored among the other ladies. She needs you to make the move yourself, whether willing or not. Had you slipped up in front of the council, there would be little chance of backing out," Dern explained. "Well, they played their hand and lost." "Don't count them finished yet, young Ka. You're a valuable prize. If their first design was this elaborate, it's certain they have additional plots to ensnare you. I would avoid them and watch my back if I were you." "I think it's about time," Hassan interjected, and motioned towards the drunken herdmaster. Gorsha was attempting to tell a story, but he was coming slightly belligerent from inebriation. While he wasn't an angry drunk, he was spending more time arguing nonsense than telling the story. Dern nodded. "We should proceed before he reaches the incoherent state." Hassan watched the herdmaster, waving his arms and vociferously denouncing the audience, waiting for the right moment. As the story concluded with a cheer from his entourage and an awkward drunken dance from Gorsha, Hassan called out, "Hey Gorsha, tell the story of the horse that tried to eat your arm." There was a wave of laughter, and those around the herdmaster began to jeer about the horse who beat him. His face colored with a mix of rage and embarrassment. He strutted with a wobbling gait towards the Kahra's dais and stopped directly in front of Hassan. Everyone in the grand hall was focused on the encounter. "Our great Ka wishes to hear a tale of his vicious she-beast," Gorsha barked to his larger audience rather melodramatically. A gale of laughter greeted his pronouncement, as most were familiar with Alewa's temperament. Shall we tell him the tale of his flesh-eating Dulhar?" The herdmaster was feeding off the attention and stoked it with every word and action. A cheer of yes called back. He grabbed a small stool from his fireside, then shakily mounted to be more visible. "There once was a Dulhar named Brahava." "No! Alewa!" the crowd chanted. Gorsha waved frantically to shush them and almost fell off his pedestal. When the crowd fell into silence, he continued. Brahava was an angry sort. He felt all of horsekind was beneath him. There was a murmur of agreement. No horse was worthy of his seed, so one day in a pique of smug superiority, he took a Briarcat to mate. The tent erupted into laughter at the absurd claim. A stranger sight the world may never see. Gorsha took a swig from his mug and nearly toppled over. 2 days was all the poor cat could bear the fierceness of her belly. It kicked and bit and chewed its way clean out. Terrified to nurse a creature so angry and spiteful, she threw herself from the cliffs. There was a mix of reactions. Some laughed, some groaned, but all were engrossed in the nonsensical story. It fell upon a poor soul to care for this vicious little beast, a man whose deeds among horse kind were renowned. Such a horrific fate should never have befallen him, Gorshaw exclaimed, the last with a grandiose flourish, playing up the sympathy for bearing such a burden. And what does this selfless man get in return? He asked with rhetorical emphasis. She tries to chew his arm off. He held his visibly bruised arm up as proof, and the crowd erupted into laughter. Not a shred of appreciation. Gorshaw jumped off the stool, and almost tumbled face first into the council members. Did the story please you, my Ka? He asked once he regained his footing. Very much so. How about another one to take our people's mind off recent events? Gorshaw squinted at Hassan as if searching for the person speaking, then looked at the nearly empty mug in his hand. He finished it with one gulp and stumbled back a step. The Ka wants another tale, he bellowed. To the crowd, do you want one too? They cheered for more. Gorshaw looked back at the now empty glass disconsolately. But I'm out of nourishment. There was a unified groan. He held up his hand to silence them. Fear not. We've got us the greatest storyteller in the world. Old Dern will weave us a tale. What you think? That was what Hassan was counting on. Gorshaw was a faithful fan of Dern's storytelling and could be counted on to throw the spotlight to the old man when his own ability dwindled under intoxication. It was less obvious if the suggestion came from someone else, and Gorshaw predictably provided. The tribe embraced the recommendation eagerly, as stories from Dern were an altogether unique experience. They roared their assent and chanted for Dern to provide. I shouldn't leave the good people waiting. Dern stood and motioned for quiet. He mused. What kind of story would be fitting? It calls for something special. From the look on the Ka-Ra's face, he suspected something was afoot, but had no clue what or how to stop it. There was little he could do without going against his people's eagerness and looking foolish. His fury was clear, but he remained seated. Dern assumed his masterful mantle of bard and storyteller. He shuffled around the tent melodramatically from lantern to lantern, extinguishing their light to create the perfect atmosphere. Along the way, he interacted with his audience in little acts of dramatics to build anticipation. The mood grew as Dern's behavior promised one of his more fanatical performances. As the last lantern went dark and light retreated to a flickering ring around the fire, Dern returned to a spot by the dais. With approaching Dahara and the ascension of our Ka, I believe this night calls for a true tale of our people. Something to harden our resolve in this changing world, filled with new threats. His voice, though low, carried through the entire crowd. They were engrossed by every word. We need to embolden the true purpose of the Khan Shogal. Not a story to entertain, but something to teach. He paused for a moment and looked around the room. It begins many years ago, before the Khan Shogal walked this land. Let me sum it up for you, old man, Nirvash interrupted, clearly irritated. The gods were dead and gone, like all your stories. The end. Several sycophants laughed, but there was a groan of discontent from the audience. Dern smiled at the slight. You can't exactly fault history for being consistent, can you? If today's history differs from tomorrow's, then it isn't truly history. But that's philosophy, my dear man. Tonight, I recite the truth of our origins. Where did the Khan Shogal come from? Why do we wander? What is the greatness lost? There was clear discomfort among the council to this announcement, but Dern was prepared to cut them off before they could protest. With a grand flourish, Dern tossed a small bundle into the fire. The reaction was immediate. The flames burst upward as they consumed the fuel, but they twisted and contorted as it altered by the feast. Red and gold flickered with fading light as blues and greens rose up from the ashen packet to discolor the fire with an otherworldly hue. There was a unified gasp of awe as the ghostly light illuminated the grand hall in subtle radiance. With one simple act, Dern silenced the protest of the council, for even they looked in stunned amazement. In the final years of the gods, war plagued the world. The pouch in the fire crackled, with a sound that hinted of spears and swords in a titanic clash. Gods died, gods rose to greater heights, and some, in the interest of the world and their people, gave up their very potential and submitted to oblivion. The sounds of battle continued, but were joined by the sounds of steam escaping. The high-pitched whistles and hissing blended into the cries of fallen and dying. The realism sent a chill through the room that bit deeply into the psyche of all present. There were gods who believed their survival was all that mattered. Their existence was superior to those of the humans. They argued that any action at survival was justified. Despite the atrocities it inflicted upon their followers. But there were also gods of great wisdom who understood the purpose to which they were created, to guide and protect the humans. It was from this group those who created the Highlands ascribed. Hatsune and Volgoth. They were devout protectors of their people. In fact, our homeland was born from their love and their work to create a world that could sustain and protect their followers. Durin let the anticipation build. It was part of his mastery of storytelling. He played with the emotions and tensions of his audience to heighten their experience. From the outer rim to the ridgelands beyond, and the windswept high plains of the Stone Lords, the blessings of Hatsune and Volgoth granted prosperity and bounty to the land. Towering cliffs held enemies' armies at bay, and the rejuvenating rains filled lakes and rivers, and even the great sky sea. It was a lush environment that fed their followers, but such a paradise could not last. For in the prosperity of its people, rival gods saw a threat. Hatsune and Volgoth led their people in relative peace during the final wars of the Falling. The Highlands insulated them from the horrors befalling the rest of the world, and their neutrality kept most enemies at bay. But they foresaw a time when their existence would be threatened. In their wisdom, they prepared for a world without them. They knew their people would require guidance to face the changing world. Another packet disappeared into the flames, and the fire shriveled in upon itself to a violet shade that barely illuminated Durin's face. It flickered within its depths like lightning. A rumbling thunder accompanied the flashes as if the very heat of a storm was captured within. Stone and storm met with passion and purpose, Durin's voice called amidst the fury of a crackling sky. Through this forging of a love, they conceived a child of crafted intent, a god and child, not born from the random elements of his parents, but of directed design. From their conception arose a god unlike any before it. The thunder faded. The crashes dulled to a storm passing into the distance. The dark violet tint receded as the natural firelight returned, but the light remained subdued as if the tale's mood kept the flames bound in submission. Gildan was born of a new divine mandate, an attribute that contrasted with all other gods. In all history, the gods were served by their followers, and through that devotion gained their potential to exist. But Gildan was born as a god of devotion and service. Not devotion unto himself, but to his people. Hatsune and Volgoth infused their love and dedication into a being born of those emotions, a god born to serve, not be served. A god dedicated to the lives and well-being of his flock, out of the divine intent, not merely to survive. The wars of gods and men were drawing to a conclusion throughout the continent. The ultimate victor was a pantheon of gods who joined together to rule mankind. They marched armies across the lands, extinguishing the lives of their rivals' followers and in turn killing the gods. This assembly of virtue set out to convert the entire world to assure their survival. Without rival religions, there could be no other gods to threaten their followers' faith. A few remnant religions persisted in far-off corners, but the only true rival to the assembly's supremacy was Hatsune and Volgoth. The devotion of the Highlands flock was a definite threat, but the assembly of virtue was even more angered by the blasphemy of Gildan's existence, for it was anathema to their own faith that required strict adherence to laws and virtues. Everything they demanded of their followers was threatened if the idea that gods should serve their people spread. So the assembly of virtue amassed their armies and marched on the Highlands. Hatsune and Volgoth foresaw the inevitable rise of the assembly and prepared as best they could. They gave to Gildan the greatest of their adherents. For a life of service to their gods, they would now be served by a god. Their son gathered his flock and led them to a place where he could protect them with his fledgling godhood. They fled to an island amidst the sea of hymns to ride out the coming atrocities, having assured their people's future. The Paramore deities prepared for war. Durin paused to take a drink. The people sat enthralled with his tale. This was a history few ever heard, and even for those knowledgeable about the past, there was much revealed they never knew. But the greatest revelations were yet to come. With a flick of his wrist, Durin cast the next pouch. A rage of blood-red flame bloomed skyward, and the clash of weapons and dying screams filled the air. The armies of the assembly spanned the horizon as they marched upon our homeland. Even standing on the cliffs of the outer rim, it was impossible to see their farthest ranks. They marched at the dictate of their gods, summoned to prove their faith upon the bodies of unbelievers. Volgoth called together the clans of his people, the Stone Lords. Their devotion and alignment lay closest to the element of earth from which Volgoth drew his powers, and their gifts made them formidable. They were imbued with a skill unrivaled with metal and stone, and they forged an arsenal of magnificent weapons and armor. The Stone Lords met the Assembly's might at the cliffs of the Outer Rim, and refused them passage into the Highlands. The clash of forces was cataclysmic. Another pouch met flames, and the cacophony rose to new heights. For a week the Stone Lords held the Assembly, refusing them a foothold upon the Outer Rim. But the Assembly's armies were never-ending. Their men were berserk with righteous fervor and driven by their god's threat of eternal damnation. The Stone Lords were fierce warriors, but for every enemy they slew 10 replaced them. The casualties were obscene, and cliffs and rivers ran red with blood. At last, on the 7th day, the Stone Lords were forced to retreat. Hatsune and Volgoth watched in abject horror as their followers died on the swords of the interlopers. They did all they could to prepare, yet salvation was denied. It would be simple for the Mother of Storms to stir a tempest and vanquish their encroaching enemies, but like all gods of their time, they were denied the use of their powers directly upon the land or followers of other deities. The second covenant of the gods had set limits on their powers. To strike down the worshipper of another god with one's power was to break the pact and be stricken of all potential, which for a deity formed of pure potential was certain death. So they watched their army fall back to the ridgelands, powerless to stop it. They implored the gods of the Assembly to relent, but they were possessed with self-preservation and wouldn't hear their pleas. The forces pushed on, and step by step, the Stone Lords gave ground. When they retreated at last to the high plains, their army dwindling and the faith of their men fading, the true target of the encroachment was revealed. The fire dimmed, and once more a subtle light cast a dance of shadows upon the hidebound walls. Only the faint sounds of the burning fuel intruded on the rapt silence of the audience. Even the council was ensnared by the skilled oratory, for not a single face showed discontent. Durn let the moment carry, building anticipation once more. When the mood reached crescendo, he cast yet another bundle into the flames. The light was extinguished in a flash, eliciting a startled gasp from the onlookers. "Give us your son!" Durn demanded in the darkness. A faint ember deep within the ashen remains of the fire still burned. It grew as his voice continued. The gods of the Assembly demanded the surrender of Gildan. They denounced his existence as blasphemy to the heavens. They called them feeble gods of old and offered to spare their lives in exile if they handed over the child. They promised to leave the old and infirm of the Highlands clan so Hatsune and Volgoth could live out a few remaining years before oblivion. For even in surrender, the Assembly refused to allow other deities to remain. But Hatsune and Volgoth foresaw this outcome and knew through resistance lay their demise. Durn sprinkled a light dusting of powder into the fire, and a small flame sprung to life from the glowing ember. It granted just enough light to illuminate his face amidst the deep shadows. His voice remained soft and low, a depth of sorrow bleeding through every word. They knew the only hope for their people's future lay in the survival of Gildan, and by accepting that truth, they came to terms with the end of their reign. Every follower who died was a wound to their godhood, but every enemy stopped was a chance for their son's future. The flame grew slowly, as if awoken by the growing power of his words. The Stone Lords knew it was a losing battle, yet they charged forth in answer to the Assembly's reprehensible offer. They fought for their gods with righteous fury across the breadth of the high plains, driven before the unimaginable horde they held as long as possible, buying time with life and limb. But in the end, their resistance was broken, and the might of the Stone Lords fell before the Assembly of Virtue. A communal gasp spoke to the audience's shock, but Durn gave little time to mourn. The armies of the Assembly marched unhindered across the high plains. The great cities of the sky burned. Hatsune and Volgoth watched in despair as their realm was laid to waste. But their grief was diminished by dread. Nothing remained to protect their son from destruction. Volgoth couldn't bear the pain in his lover's eyes. Her people, her son, her land were all dying, and she was helpless to prevent it. His devotion to Hatsune couldn't allow such tragedy to continue. He embraced his divine love tenderly, one last time. As she looked, with tearful understanding, he drew the stone heart from his chest and offered it in token to seal his oath of eternal love. Unburdened from love and the fear of losing her that would weaken his resolve, Volgoth descended from the heavens to meet the host of the Assembly. "It is forbidden," the enemy gods decried. "The covenant binds you," they insisted. But without his heart the god of stone cared not about repercussions. "What punishment does the covenant hold for my transgressions that you don't offer me already?" he asked the assembly. "Whether it be death as your blade strike down my faithful, or death as my wrath consumes yours, the end is the same. I choose vengeance over surrender. Feel the wrath of the stone's fury." He struck the ground with a mighty blow. Durn's next addition sent the flames erupting skyward. The percussion shook the ground and brought outcries of fear. So fierce was Volgoth's blow, the very heavens trembled. Sun and stars across the sky flickered with the shockwave. The highlands groaned in protest as the fury of its maker wrought destruction. The assembly quickly realized their folly. The land beneath the army's feet quaked with the force of Golgoth's power and split with a deafening crack. The gods of the assembly watched helplessly as a rift swallowed their forces almost to a man. As the last rumbles faded, Volgoth looked one final time to his mistress with love and farewell, before vanishing into the nether. Having broken the covenant, he was stripped of the very potential that fueled his being and banished from existence. Hatsune cried out with heartrending loss. Consumed with rage and despair, the goddess of sea and storms lost all substance. Reverting to the primal forces of her nature, wind spurred by her hatred tore across the high plains in fitful fury. The darkness of her mourning enveloped the sky in a vortex of clouds as black as night. With every scream of tortured agony, the tempest howled in answer with wrenching gusts that pummeled the land in a fierce barrage. The assembly beheld the display of divine wrath with terror, for within that storm lay the potential for their followers' demise, and in turn their own. A god willing to sacrifice themselves to save mortals was beyond their ability to comprehend, so they fled the highlands with the remnants of their army. A mild cheer went up at the assembly's retreat, but tears in many eyes were a testament to the cost of victory. Durn waited for the fire's rage to relent, withdrawing the red glare of battle from the faces around him, the flickering calm to a more natural light. The mood was set. Hatsune, though overcome with grief, controlled her tempest fury and avoided breaching the covenant as well. She allowed the enemy to flee unscathed, despite her need to avenge her loss. With Volgoth gone, her duties to son and people were paramount to vengeance. You see, the paradise of the highlands was a blending of both their powers. Alone, neither deity could have managed. With the death of Volgoth, Hatsune knew the lands would quickly follow. The people would need time to adapt to the changes, or be forced to flee the harsh new environment. And her son Gildan wasn't prepared to face the world beyond the highlands' safety. If forced to lead his people into the ravages of the god wars, the entire purpose of his existence would come to naught. So Hatsune resolved to expend her divinity like her lost love, for the salvation of her world, her people, and her son. She didn't breach the covenant, however, for that would only waste the essence of her potential. Instead, she directed it to one singular purpose, to slow the decline of the lands and give her people and her son a chance. Suspended within the eye of the tempest, and clutching the stone heart of Volgoth to her chest, the goddess Hatsune expelled the force of her divinity, and with one final expression of all-consuming grief, she wept. The tears of Hatsune fell in glistening streams across the lands she and her lover forged. With every drop, her potential infused the highlands, safeguarding it for a time from the withering that was beyond her power to fully prevent. Some claim a few of those tears were born from more than watery magic of Hatsune alone, for her truest tears were infused with the love of the Stone Lord's heart, and fell in the likeness of both stone and water as sapphires, hard as earth and blue as the deepest oceans. As the deluge subsided and the roiling clouds dissipated to the four winds, a great absence was felt across the highlands and the hearts of all its people. Hatsune and Volgoth, the creators and defenders of the land, were gone forever, banished through selfless acts of sacrifice in defense of their people. But they left gifts with their passing. With Hatsune's final act, she slowed the inevitable death of their world, and in place of the divine couple, a son remained to lead. This brings us to the most important part of the story, for here begins the origins of the Khan Shogal. Need a drink after that. Gildan was a good god, or so the stories tell. But he wasn't the salvation most hoped for. The Stone Lords sought a god of vengeance who would smite the ones who killed their patron deities. When he refused this purpose, they turned from the sun and extolled the remembrance of the Father in place of their fallen faith. The clans returned to their fortresses to worship the stone and strength Volgoth embodied, and still do to this day. Others hoped Gildan would be a god of renewal and prevent the decline of paradise, but he fell short there as well. As the frequent rains became scarce, and lakes and rivers ran dry, the devout of Hatsune turned their backs on the child god as well. Some returned to the sea, and some fled to the inland lakes. Only those who followed Gildan to the island sanctuary remained faithful, for it was to them he was sworn to serve. As the years passed and the highlands withered, Gildan maintained the island and its people in relative harmony. He walked among his followers and conversed with them as equals. He served their needs, and his priesthood did the same. They grew more insular as their god provided for them, so there was no reason to seek outside of the community. It was their defense, as there was animosity from the Stone Lords and others at Gildan and his people for not meeting expectations. In the end, he wasn't their god, and he served his people alone. There were others who held enmity against Gildan for darker reasons. With the defeat of the Assembly, their power collapsed. In an odd twist of fate, the death of the Highlands gods was their undoing. Survivors of the war spread the word of Hatsune and Volgoth's sacrifice. The possibility of divine compassion turned the people against their pantheon of gods. They realized they were slaves to gods who gave them little in return, and that sparked inflamed rebellion. The Assembly was cast down by a movement to free mankind from the yokes of religion. They spurned the very idea of gods and drove the populace to a frenzy about atrocities done in the name of heaven. The hatred spread until the few remaining gods were overthrown, and only Gildan remained. There was a reticence to mounting an army to purge the final god thanks to his divine parents' display, but it wouldn't last. In the end, Gildan was forced to make a difficult decision in service of his people. The sea of hymns had vanished with the change of climate, and with it the last line of defense for Gildan's people. They were vulnerable to attack, and the hatred of the last god made an assault almost certain. The young god concluded it was his existence that endangered those he served. For as long as he remained, the enmity and jealousy would be directed at his flock. There was only one choice he could make in service to his people. With a heavy heart, Gildan summoned his priesthood to direct them towards a salvation he knew they would resist. For the first time, Gildan compelled his people to heed his command. "You must leave my side, my children. The world has no place for my kind any more, and as long as you remain, you will be in danger. I can serve you no longer, as my very existence threatens your survival." They pleaded, but he wouldn't relent. Then a high priest named Korrig spoke up. "What of you, Blessed One? If we leave this land, what will become of you?" "I must follow my parents into oblivion," Gildan replied, sorrowfully. "For good or ill, the age of gods must come to an end. With our passing, a greatness in this world will be lost, a greatness that may never be found again. As my brethren's magic fades, the lands will fade with it. It's in your hands to find a place to sustain our people in the harsh world to come. I will sanctify this island with my dying essence, so future generations may return to honor all that was lost. But for now, you must leave. In my absence, some may wish to exploit that vulnerability. Flee. I absolve you of your oaths. Seek the places where magic still resides, for there you may flourish for a time. But be warned, the day will come when the essence of the gods is gone, and the world will be a changed place. Prepare our people for the hardships to come." Korrig stepped forth, silencing the other priests' outcries. "You served us truly, great lord. We shall faithfully repay your service by honoring this final command. We shall lead our people as you have bid. But you stood by our people in life and death, and swore we'd never be alone. I wish to repay that honor. Let me stand by your side and witness the moment such greatness is lost, so I might speak of your sacrifice to future generations." And so, Gildan's people gathered their belongings into wagons to leave the only home they ever knew. The world was changing rapidly, and without their deity, the struggles would be great. But they chose to prove their faith, and so hardened themselves against the danger and ventured out into the harsh lands beyond. The priest Korrig remained at his god's side. He recorded what wisdom the divine had yet to offer that might be lost to eternity in his passing. As he consoled Gildan with the love and devotion his god had always given him, but the time came for the last god to depart, Illyria. Korrig wept, for he felt great sorrow at not only the loss of a dear friend, but also the immense loss to the world. Will the world ever see such greatness again? Korg begged. Or must humanity walk a dark path without the light of a god's power to guide us? Gildan thought on this deeply before responding. A god is but a conscious force of pure potential, he replied. All existence is born from this potential. So as long as there is existence, there shall always be a chance. A spark of hope, of faith, may someday awaken the greatness lost. But it's in man's hands to seek it out and decide for himself. Perhaps in the end, mankind will be their own gods, commanders of their own destiny. For now, that is what you must be for your people. Lead them, give them faith and hope as they walk into an uncertain future. Help them find their own greatness. That is my final request of you, child. Use all your gifts to protect them, for I no longer can. With that final command, Gildan stepped out onto the waters of his sacred pool. He opened his arms in a show of love of his most devoted follower, and vanished in a flash of blinding radiance. The death of the final god shook the foundation of Illyria. None living were spared the sudden emptiness from the passing of the divine, and as the soul witnessed, the high priest Korg was irrevocably altered. Though it would take many years to discover the import of such a change, Korg's immortal soul was affected by Gildan's passing. The time he spent in those final hours reshaped him as a man as well. He learned secrets of the world and its creations he could never have imagined, and he was more aware of how impactful his loss would be for the world of Illyria and its people. Korg bore a great burden as he returned to his people, tasked with assuring their survival. Korg led his people from the highlands into an unfamiliar world, changing in the absence of its creators. In those initial years, when their faith was still strong, they found lands capable of sustaining them. Though the gods were gone, magic lingered in the lands they cultivated, and these bounties were a blessing. But without a deity to maintain them, the magic slowly faded. The gods had manipulated the forces of nature, altering weather patterns and imbuing territories with properties not possible by natural order alone. Everything they created began to submit to the constraints of physical laws. Weather patterns shifted, turning lush forests into barren plains, lakes receded into deserts. Everywhere mankind faced a complete shifting of their world. Through this madness, Korg held true to his god's last request. Early on, Korg displayed an uncanny knack for seeking out bastions where magic still lingered. His ability kept his followers alive while millions died around the world. And though some decided to leave the nomadic life to which he led them, his gift kept most of the faithful to their path. Korg refused to admit anything special allowed for these successes, but as the magic continued to die and the sanctuaries grew scarcer, he discovered he could feel the small reservoirs of the divine, clearly in the bleakness of its absence. Witnessing Gildan's passing had somehow attuned his soul to the magic of the gods. When he drew close, he felt the energy beckoning him. Korg believed it was a final blessing from his god, and he mastered what he could for his people. The sense wasn't the only change inflicted on Korg, however. Something in the moment of Gildan's passing also bound the priest's soul to that same essence, making him reliant upon it. As the magic faded and the months of travel between sanctuaries grew longer, Korg's life faded as well. He quickly recovered when brought to a new bastion, but as those places vanished, his weakness grew. When a year passed with no salvation, the priest was left on the edge of death. He could no longer lead his people and left the command to the tribe to his 3 sons. But without his gift, their chances of finding a new fount of magic was almost impossible. But when all was thought lost, something miraculous occurred. The youngest son was on a scouting mission when a sensation overtook his senses. A thrumming sound filled his mind and compelled him forward. He rode beyond the next line of hills where the magnetic calling originated and found the ruins of a small temple next to a bubbling spring. The hum emanated from the water. Understanding came quickly. As the son hoped, the closer his family came to the temple, the stronger his father grew. The magic he discovered was enough to rekindle the spark of life in Korg and hold the touch of death at bay. Korg understood the significance of the event. He called his sons to his side and asked if they could sense the power. All admitted they could, yet none exhibited the same weakness from the absence of the magic. His sons inherited his gift but avoided the curse. Korg was deeply affected by the discovery, and retreated to the temple for several days. When he came forth again, he called his people together and spoke. The magic is nearly gone, and with my reliance upon it, I doubt I will survive another season. I wish to go home and enter oblivion in the grace of my god. And so when the magic of the spring vanished, the people of the fallen god returned to the highlands. The island home they returned to was now a stone pinnacle, rising from the sandy desolation that was once the Sea of Hymns. A hidden path led to the top, where they discovered a marvel. The last god's vow held true. The land retained some of its bounties. The pond where Gildan departed remained for his people's return. Corig wept to behold the scene of his god's last moments. With tears in his eyes he waded into the pool to revel in the remnants of his presence. Legend says that within those waters he had a great vision. When he rose from the pool, he called his people together once more. "The gift imbued upon my line wasn't given of intent," he told them. "It was a gift of chance. But intended or not, this ability has kept us alive. In his final moments, Gildan told me the destiny of humanity lies in the hands of mankind. He commanded me to use what gifts I have to lead our people to greatness. The greatness lost can only rise again through faith and hope. This gift is our hope. I have seen possibilities I could never imagine, for though I wasn't granted a glimpse of the future, I've been blessed with an understanding of this gift's potential. We can seek the greatness that was lost. Perhaps we can bring it back. It's not a certainty. We may never reawaken it, but I have seen the potential for such a future within my line. I'll never leave this place before I die. But I ask you all, will you seek the greatness lost? Will you follow my sons into the world to seek in the hope that one day the Highlands can be the paradise again?" A cry of assent arose as his people accepted the charge. In that decision, the Conchogal were born, the seekers of the greatness lost. Corig's 3 sons each took a remnant of their people when they left, vowing to return in a year to discuss what they found. Thus the first 3 tribes of our people came into being. When they returned after that first year, their father had passed. They buried him near the pool with his god, and marked his resting place with a new title. The high priest of Gildan was to be forever revered as the Ayun Ka, the first seeker. When the tribes left that sacred place once more, they vowed to return to honor their father, and the vow they made, a celebration that would eventually be known as the Dahara. Hey, shoot! Oh. Give me a moment. Sneezes are a little different for me. Oh. Okay. Whew. And so the Conchogal have continued to seek, led by the direct lineage of the Ayun Ka. For in their blood, and in fact, in most of our blood nowadays lies the gift of seeking, and that is why the Conchogal seek. There was an odd silence as Dern finished his tale. So many never truly understood the history of their people, and this realization impacted them deeply. The old man allowed the quiet to remain, for in it the Conchogal were finding reflection, an outcome they intended all along. How many of them would truly believe and take up the cause their people accepted centuries ago? There was no way to know, but with luck, everyone that did would be one more voice of support for Asan. After a few minutes, the mood changed, and voices began to intrude on the peaceful stillness. Dern was bombarded with questions, but there was no chance for answers. A commotion broke out at the Grand Hall's entrance, drawing everyone's attention from the storyteller. One of the guards on watch called for assistance as he entered. He stumbled under the burden of a beaten and battered man. Others leaped to assist them to the fireside, where Dern came to the aid of the wounded victim. As he lifted the man's head to check his condition, a gasp arose. The bruised and bloody face was one of the men sent to Anhara. A wailing cry filled the tent as a woman ran to the injured man's side, weeping for her husband. Kahra Hazan rose from his seat and approached with a look of rage. Before either could speak, the wounded soldier lifted his head, and with what remained of his strength gave his report. "Dead! They're all dead!" The soldier's voice rasped through the blood in his mouth. Then he collapsed into unconsciousness.